So, just an interesting question here. What has this Canadian rye whiskey got in common with all these American bourbons? We got a Heaven's Door here. It's a straight bourbon whiskey. We've got a Derringer, a Rabbit Hole Derringer, and it's another bourbon. We've got a Blanton's, another bourbon there. We have here a Woodford Reserve bourbon. This one here we're going to call an American Rye, twice barreled, Knob Creek twice barreled rye, but they all have something in common. And what they have in common. So, you're probably thinking rye. This rye whiskey does not have rye in it. This is a 20-year-old rye whiskey called 90. It's Canadian rye whiskey called 90. It's from Century Distillers, which were originally Potters, which were bought out by Highwood Distillers in High River. And it can be called rye whiskey because Canadian law basically states to call a whiskey, it has to be aged at least 3 years in Canadian oak barrels. And in this case here, it was new charred barrels and also finished in bourbon, as well as, I believe, final finishing in sherry. But there's no rye in it because Canadian law allows us to identify Canadian whiskey as rye whiskey. It is traditionally, we have looked at rye whiskey as Canadian whiskey. So the word rye can also mean Canadian whiskey. A little confusing because this whiskey has 51% rye in it. Now what they all have in common is corn. This has a fairly good corn base. Makes it actually a very smooth rye. A little different than a lot of we'll say 100% rye whiskeys in Canada. Maybe other than a Lot 40. We're talking 65-70% corn. Again here, 70% corn. I'm not sure, I'm going to say 60 to 65% corn. And again, probably somewhere between 65 and 70% corn. Okay? Most of these are going to have some, I believe this does have wheat in it. And some will have barley. This, just about all of them will probably have a mash bill with barley. They'll either have, if they don't have the barley, they might put wheat. Wheat mellows it out a bit. Some of them might even have a malted barley. But it's the corn that's the base of it. So this is a corn whiskey. This is all about finishing. It's about barrel finishing. So another thing we can mention about American bourbons is that when they do their mash bill, it's pretty common to see in most of these whiskeys a mash bill, like I say, majority of course, it has to be over 51% corn, and then you're talking a lot of times it'll be rye. And rye can vary. Every bourbon will be different. Some mash bills, they might have 10%. They might even have 15%. They might have 18%, even up to 20% rye. And same with barley. They'll have a mix of barley, which can range anywhere 8, 10, 12, 15%, and so on. And with some, like I believe this whiskey here, I'm pretty sure it's wheat. So some of them might have a wheat as part of their mash bills. So just basically the way we look at American bourbons is they mix the grains together in a mash. In Canada we don't do that. We do the grains separately and we blend them. But in this case, this rye has no rye. It's just corn whiskey. So we'll be reviewing this, by the way. So when I did my review of Canadian whiskeys, you saw this whiskey. It was one that was actually sold through Highwood Distilleries but that's not where it came from. So it's kind of a story of two distilleries. I'm just going to give you a little bit of history. So this actually came from the Potters. It goes back to Ernie Potter, which in 1958 he built a distillery. I believe it was in Langley, and his focus was at first just liqueurs, but eventually he did get into spirits. And it was eventually purchased, I believe it was Captain Terry is his sort of a nickname. I believe his full name was Captain Harold John Cameron Terry. But he was an Australian seaman, and he obviously ran into a fair amount of money to be able to acquire Potters. And he basically even took the company public in 1967. And he was the CEO for about 20 years. And in 1990, he moved it from where it originally was in Langley to Kelowna, British Columbia. And it remained there till 2006. Now here's where the second distillery, Highwood Distillery, comes into play. And Highwood Distillers, they've been around for a little under 50 years. It's a family-owned, I think it's the largest independent distillery in Canada. And it is in High River, just south of Calgary. And the distillery was founded in 1974, and it was originally called Sunnyvale. And then in 1984, it was renamed Highwood Distillers. And of course, it is right on the High River, in High River. And the interesting thing, and I think it's called the Highwood River, if I remember right. My apologies there. So anyways, the distillery is in a beautiful location. It's right on the foothills of Alberta. And, until 1997, both distillery and pretty much everything was done right in High River. I think they moved some of their offices to Calgary. But what's important is the distillery has really grown in High River. And, of course, what happened was when they purchased, we'll say, Potters, or the other name was Cascadia. I think they actually changed the name to Cascadia, but everybody still knew it as Potters. They also bought, when they bought the actual distillery, they also bought the stock in the distillery. And there was a lot of old stock. So what had happened was, I believe they were planning 2012 or 2013, they were planning on launching the 90 series. Now the 90 series was started as part of a Potters, we'll say Cascadia presentation and they called it a rye whiskey, which we'll get into in a bit here. And the 90 was an age statement, so they had different age statements. And they were going to launch it, and I think it was officially, it was going to be 2013, they were going to launch it, and they were quite excited about it. So they had all these, 10, 12, 20-year-old, and so on, that they were going to launch. And of course, what happened was the High River floods, we'll say the Alberta floods, because Calgary got hit as well. Terrible floods. Lot of destruction, and it did a lot of damage to the distillery. It destroyed a lot of their branded bottles, their current branding of bottles that were destroyed. They were basically not usable after the flood, so they lost a lot of their stock, and it delayed the launch of this product here, the 90 series. So this kind of hung around in sort of stealth mode for quite a few years. Now they eventually launched, I think there was a Stampede, I forget how old, that was quite old. Was it 21 or 25 years old? I forget, I'll have to do a little more research on that one, but I do remember it. And they had a 21-year-old, but this one here, this is a 20-year-old 90, and it was launched a few years ago. Very good price on it, probably under $80. It's a 20-year-old rye whiskey with no rye. Canadian law, as I explained, allows you to call a Canadian whiskey rye whiskey. It doesn't have to have rye, because rye refers to Canadian whiskey. It's always referred to Canadian whiskey. So we're learning a little bit about the word rye and rye whiskey, that probably a lot of the whiskey, if you want pure rye, it has to say 100% rye on the label. And it can say rye on the label and have no rye. In this case, it's corn. And it is aged in casks. There are a total of 20 years, and those are new charred oak casks. And then I believe it's finished in bourbon as well as sherry casks. So we're going to give this a review. We talked about doing a review on the Century 90 is the branding from, of course, Highwood Distillers, but it originally was a Potters Distillery product. You'll see 90 on the bottle. It can be very confusing because it is a Century brand, which was part of the Potters branding, or we'll say Cascadia. More confusion. We got a lot of different distilleries, Cascadia, you got Potters, you've got Highwood, but it is Highwood today that owns this, that both the Potters, we'll call it Cascadia now, distillery, they do own it. Evidently they operate it once a week, or is it one, I think it's 1 week a year to keep the license going. And that is in Kelowna. But Highwood Distillery is in High River, this whiskey here is part of the stock they inherited when they purchased the distillery. I think it was 2006 when they purchased that distillery. But anyways, let's give it a review. And we know the story behind it. It is a 100% corn whiskey that has been finished in new oak, charred, and I don't know if it's number 2 or number 4, number 3 char. I never got that information. It is supposedly finished in bourbon barrels, and also my understanding is sherry. So this is all information, lots of research. As you can see, I've been tackling this, and I do have another bottle because you never know when this stuff is going to disappear. It's a heck of a good price on it. It was actually below $80. So doesn't mean it's a good whiskey, but it tells you that they're obviously somebody's appreciating it. What I like about this whiskey is that the price allows you to purchase it if it's not that great a whiskey. Anyways, let's give it a pour. It's probably the best priced 20-year-old whiskey you're going to buy. Period. A lot less expensive than my other 20-year-old whiskeys, that's for sure. 21-year-old, 24-year-old, or whatever. Okay, the nose. Lots of caramel. Butterscotch, caramel. Vanilla. A little bit of orange peel. See if we can taste the corn or nose the corn. Corn is sweet. You get a little bit of, but I'm actually getting, I'm getting the oak. Yeah, we're definitely getting some oak here. Marmalade, even some chocolate notes. Almond, wee bit of tobacco in the background there. Now somebody described rye notes in here, and I'm not sure where they got the rye notes from. There's a couple of people that put rye notes in, and I don't think they're aware that there is no rye grain in this whiskey. But they did, of course, rye whiskey on the label. In fact, it says Canadian Rye Whiskey, and there is no rye. And we know the story behind that because Canadian law allows distilleries to label a Canadian whiskey rye, because that was they were both exchanged back and forth, those names. Many years ago, rye was thought as Canadian whiskey. It wasn't even referred to as a rye whiskey. But in the States, you have to have, I believe it would be a 51% rye to call it a rye whiskey. So it is right off the bat, I would say, got a little bit of bourbon, but it's, then again, you know, not, like when I put it next to a bourbon, I'm certain it's not a bourbon. So it's something between a bourbon and maybe a blended Scotch. Okay, the palate. Very sweet. Again, back to the caramel. And we mentioned the butterscotch. We have little bit of, I would say some maybe, I like to use desserts that I've used in the past there, but this one's not quite the same. It's not really, I'd say butter tarts. Yeah, I think butter tarts would be a good descriptor. So just a little bit of information on the whiskey itself. It is a the reason they call it 90 is because it is 45% ABV, and that's where it gets the 90 from. And yes, it is 20 years old. My understanding it is non-chill filtered, and there is no coloring in it. So it has a nice amber color to it, not dark, but more of a light amber color to it. So we're going to top that one off. This is a nice sipper. Back to the marmalade, orange peel. We got some orange citrus notes here, but they're more of a sweet. So I'm going to say more jammy. And again, the oak, even maybe a little bit of a cedar taste to it. And of course, vanilla. Bit of tobacco at the back end. For the finish, a lot of a repeat of what we've had. Like I say, I am getting a little more spice, and a bit, and maybe that's what the tobacco comes in. It's a sweet tobacco, but there is some chocolate mixed with that tobacco, so not much of a burn to this, really. For a corn whiskey, usually corn whiskey gives me a burn, but this one doesn't. And it's a very smooth, there's no bite to this, eh? I mean, 20 years in oak, and you know, I'm getting the oak. There's definitely oak there, but it's not, there's no astringency to it. So now I'm going to say a medium, short to medium finish, okay? In terms of legs, yeah, it's syrupy. It's got some thick legs. I mean, I've got stuff going sideways here with, we'll do that again. So you can tell thick legs because they're not going straight down. They're going at an angle sideways. This is a very syrupy, a very thick drink. So lots of body to it. So what I'm going to do, we're going to play around with some water here. I'm going to top it up a bit. And it's an interesting whiskey. I've read lots of reviews on this. And I've had lots of time to, you know, I have a second bottle I haven't opened, but this one here, I've worked it over. I've had other people, you know, sample it. I'm also using it for blending. At the price I paid it, like I say, it was, I think I got it on special for $72, $73, somewhere around there at BCL, but At that price, a 20-year-old whiskey, it's ridiculous. And I think part of it is they would never sell it at that price, except the stock is sitting there. They inherited a lot of this stock, and I think they just want to get rid of some of it. My understanding, there's some barrels that they inherited there that were over 33 years old. So who knows? There was a 25-year-old Calgary Stampede edition. I missed that one. So, but and I heard some good things about it. So, but I'm also hearing mixed reviews on this. And what I learned about this was when the bottle was fresh, some of those reviews that were a little bit hard on it. I mean, they weren't real bad reviews, but for, you know, when you're looking at whiskey reviews, you know, 3.5 stars to 4. I mean, you're trying to get above the 3.5 star mark. And so, you know, they were getting 3.5 to 4 stars with some people. Some were giving it 4 to 4.5 stars. And some were up in the 90s. So I don't, you know, I mean, it was all over the place. We were getting, that's probably enough. Yeah, no more. Yeah, it wasn't consistent to what, you know, when I do a lot of research on my, you know, my whiskeys that I'm going to review, I don't see them all over the place like I did with this whiskey. This was like quite high to, you know, dropping all the way down to a 3.5 out of 5. And it was unusual to see that, you know. So here's why I think that happened. When this bottle was full, it was a little, there was more, maybe we can even say organic acetone notes and solvent notes and that kind of stuff mixed in with the sweetness. There was always the sweetness. It gave that blast of sweetness, but when the spirit, when the actual alcohol came through, yeah, you know, you kind of, but as the bottle went down, that disappeared completely. And you didn't hear me once mention that, and I would have, but it's gone. So the fact that if you do not let this sit in the glass, like I've got a 24-year-old whiskey. It's got Macallums. It's a mix of Macallums, and it's called Old Perth, and it's cask strength, 56%. Now, if you don't let that sit for a while and you don't add water, it can be harsh. It's a 24-year-old. It's a Macallums with some Highland Park. You know, and percentage-wise, I'd say it's very high percentage Macallums, and you know, then some Highland Park. And I'm not sure. You know, there's a couple of other distilleries that you might have snuck a little bit, but it's a majority of the whiskey is those two distilleries. So, but I mean, at cask strength, you gotta let it sit for a bit, and then a little bit of water, and then it changes the drink. So, this is only 45%, but still, I really noticed the difference. So, okay, we've let it sit for a while in the glass, and you can see the bottle itself is oxidized. We've added some water. So let's see what happens now. Very sweet. No alcohol at all. It's amazing what drops of water will do, eh? Okay, a little bit of alcohol. Oh, and I can smell the orange. Orange and potpourri and floral. And I'm not getting the wood, but I am getting butterscotch. Well, the palate. Wow. This is amazing, actually, because this might have been the, you know, I drank a fair amount of this, and this might have been my best shot. So I think as this whiskey goes down, as it gets oxidized, and adding just a little bit of water, boy, does it open up. Sweet, very, very vanilla. And the wood is coming through, but sweet wood. The orange is there, the butterscotch is there. And just a wee bit of wood, but boy, it's a dessert. This is a very nice sipper. So everything I've mentioned here, other than the spices, have actually mellowed out a bit. So there is a bit of spice, but it's more like cinnamon now. So it's the tobacco's disappeared. We've got sweet cinnamon, like the cinnamon hops, but not really hot. More, yeah, I would just say sweet cinnamon. Maybe some cinnamon raisin toast would be a good descriptor. Buttered toasted cinnamon raisin bread, and that's a good descriptor for this. So hey, score wise, you know what, it's a 20-year-old whiskey, didn't pay anything for it. Really. You can tame this whiskey, obviously. And I've given it a fair chance. The scores and the reviews that were done, that I read, which were a little harder on it, I think these were fresh bottles, and fair enough. This one here, maybe if I'd given it a score at the beginning, I give it a score now, there's going to be a substantial difference in the two scores. So I can almost give you an idea that it would be under 80 in the beginning, certainly under 80. When I first got the bottle, but this is going to be an 80 for sure, an 80 plus, an 81 for a corn whiskey. That's pretty incredible, So I'm going to give this, is it a lot 40? It might even be competing a bit with the lot 40, but it's such a different whiskey. We've got apples and oranges here, so it's not fair. The age, I'm gonna say that because it's a different kind of whiskey, it's corn whiskey. I'm gonna hang in the 81. It's a good investment. It's definitely a good investment. So I'm gonna say, drink wisely, drink intelligently, do not drink and drive. And until the next time, so much.